things I remember is how hard it was to write 4 words. Suffering is a gift. It was one of the hardest things, and it even makes me emotional now because I'm thinking, I don't want to suffer.
What if the reason you're exhausted isn't your schedule? What if the real problem is deeper than being busy, overworked, or stretched thin? A lot of men aren't just tired, they are driven by something they don't know how to name. The need to prove themselves, the fear of slowing down, the pressure to stay useful, needed, productive, strong. And even in church, even in ministry, even in doing things for God, a man can still be living like his worth has to be earned. Today's guest is going to help expose what's really underneath burnout, striving, and spiritual numbness. Not just bad habits or poor balance, but the deeper heart issues of identity, control, performance, and false rest. If you've been trying to build a life, a name, or even a ministry that can hold your soul together, this episode is going to show you why those will never work and why the rest you're looking for is only found in Jesus. Welcome back to Stand Up Dude, the podcast that helps men become the men God created them to be through the truth and power of the gospel. Today's guest is Curtis Zackery, also known as CZ. CZ is a pastor, author, and the founder of Find Rest, a gospel-centered ministry that serves people in worn down, uncertain, and spiritually depleted seasons. He's written Soul Rest and Finding Soul Rest, and a lot of his ministry has centered on helping people discover what it means to be seen, heard, known, and loved through the finished work of Jesus. What makes this conversation especially important is that CZ's message is not just about slowing down. It gets underneath the hustle and underneath the burnout, underneath the ministry grind, and asks, what is really ruling a man's heart when he can't stop, can't rest, and can't receive who he truly is in Christ? CZ is also a close personal friend of Pedro, and we're excited to welcome him to the Stand Up Dude podcast. So welcome, CZ, to Stand Up Dude.
Man, those were a lot of kind words.
Hey.
So I hope there's something of significance that I can bring to the conversation.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I'm so glad you're here, bro.
Oh, it's fun.
I'm so glad you're here.
So fun.
It's really just an excuse for us to hang out.
Hey, we'll do that, man. If we had coffee, that would be the that'd be the capper.
Yeah.
That would be the help. That would be the help. I love that we're talking about rest in this conversation. Not just because you're somebody who's educated around rest, but you practice it. You're a true practitioner of it. Anybody who's ever been to your house, any other leader man I've ever met has said, when I go into that man's house, I feel the rhythms are different. I feel the cadence is different. You're somebody that when I've gone through some of my roughest seasons in life, and you know this, I've sat around your fire many times in really rough mental spaces, heart spaces, and you never shunned that away. You never kicked me to the curb and said, get out of here. You welcomed me. You made me feel safe and loved and cared for.
Man, that's cool.
And so I just want everybody listening to know this is a man who practices it. He lives that out, and he does so with grace and gentleness. So super thankful for that.
Yeah.
I know there's a lot of men who would just say, like, I'm just busy. I just got a lot of stuff going on. Like I just got a full schedule and I'm fine. I'm good. And maybe they can't even acknowledge maybe the rumble underneath, the feelings of anxiety, the stress, the feeling disconnected. How do you help somebody kind of identify in your work? Yeah, I mean, what does it mean to just pay attention to what's going on in your heart?
Yeah, I think what you said right there, pay attention, is a huge aspect of this whole conversation. I'll start out by saying I think busyness can be the illusion of significance. And sometimes what'll happen is we find solace or security in the fact that when somebody goes, hey, what's going on? Or what are you up to?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm just running around. I got a lot going on. It can feel like significance is being communicated through that interaction. But the reality is just moving around and just doing things doesn't necessarily lend toward productivity. The perfect example I like to give in my own sort of failings would be in the times when we've had to move, I'm the worst packer in the whole world. My wife will say something like, hey, why don't you just go in the garage and like start getting that together? And it's like, all right, cool. So for 2 hours, I'm just like picking stuff up and moving it over to the side, and then I'll stack it on top of the other one, and then I'll think, well, that stack needs to be over here, and then she'll come in like, well, what did you put in boxes? And it's, well, nothing. I'm just moving stuff around,
Just organized.
And I had the illusion of productivity, but the reality was, even if I'm sweating, I'm not actually doing anything. Yeah. And I think, though a silly metaphor, that's actually what I think a lot of people experience, especially men who want to be people who show up with significance and purposefulness in what we do and how we show up to the world. And because the desire for significance or contribution is so high, we don't stop and take a true consideration of whether or not what we're moving around is actually moving anything forward. Wow. So I think that's the first thing I would say right there is in any conversation that I would start with to help people actually lean into, first of all, that consideration. But then number two, I think what's really interesting is I don't think people actually have a good definition for what rest really represents in their lives. And please stop me because I don't want to just be talking the whole time. But I think what's really interesting is I think for a lot of us, especially men, we have two false narratives in our brain when it comes to rest. The first one is rest equals laziness. So if I have to finally admit that I need to take a break, I'm sort of acknowledging, man, I don't have what it takes, the stick-to-itiveness. I am slacking, in my responsibility to provide, to show up, to build. So rest equals laziness will cause me to avoid any sort of sense of needing to sit down for a second. Yeah. Or the second one is really pervasive. It's rest equals failure. So if I need to admit that I need to stop, I can't cut it. I'm actually acknowledging that I don't have what it takes, not only just for a temporary moment or just for respite, but truly in life. If I can't just keep going, then what's really wrong with me? And so I think it's important to get to the place that we realize rest is more than what I think we've assigned to it in our regular cultural rhythms. And it just takes a deeper dive. And once we start to discover our definition, I think it leads us to a place where we can experience it for real.
In your own life, like, first of all, rest, I think you're right. It's so overlooked in everything that we do. Even if you want to do bodybuilding, if you want to work out, rest is where the muscle is built. It's you break it down in the gym. If you don't rest, you don't recover and you don't grow. Yeah. And I think that that's just like one example of life where that's happening. In your own story, when did you begin to realize like that your striving wasn't just a pacing issue, but was like a worship issue? And even what did it reveal about like what you were truly leaning on for identity or for worth?
Man, I think that's the most significant and important realization that any person can make. It's exactly how you framed it, not just simply a sustainability thing, but like, what does this mean even relative to my relationship with God? Yeah. And for me personally, everyone has different vocations. I think it's all the same question, but for me specifically, I was in ministry at the time, serving in a small church plant in the Bay Area. And I will easily say that the work that we got to do was really good and meaningful work. We got to help homeless friends find places to live. People were recovering from addiction. We had people who were transitioning from prison into civilian life, young families who were just wanting to learn about the Bible. We got to like help people understand who Jesus was. It was really good and meaningful work. The only problem was while I was doing that work, I slowly started to discover this rising fatigue that I couldn't quench. It wasn't something that, let's drive out by the Bay Bridge and let's just go take a walk, or like, let's go for a day and grab coffee. And I'd come back and it just wasn't being touched by any sort of time off. And it helped me to see that there was something deeper underneath. And, in times past, a lot of what I had done in my work could be valued by my output. So like, man, you do a good job. That's sort of the resolve that you need in it. It's like you're commended for it and it feels like there's a landing place. But the type of work, even though it was really good work, didn't have resolve. I'd preach a sermon or lead a Bible study and I'd be pouring myself into it, everything I have. And then we'd get to the end and somebody'd be like, yeah, cool. So can you help me like find a place to live, or can you help me find a place where they won't knock my tent down at night so that the cops, it's like no, wait, I just want to talk about like how good I did at the Bible study, like, you know, and what I saw was that fatigue that was rising was that I was operating solely sustained by my own effort, my own strength, my own willpower, my own ability. And really what it came down to is something that I'll go to my death saying because it's changed everything. I was doing good work for God. I just wasn't doing that work with God. Ooh. And I think that that's where the reckoning comes in the question you're asking. In my own life, that was the realization. There were some other factors that sort of compounded it. But at the end of the day, when you're talking about how did I get to a place where it wasn't just, okay, I need to figure out sustainable rhythm so I can be more productive, but what does this actually mean relative to my relationship with God? That's it. Yeah. And there's a quote from a guy named Soren Kierkegaard, 1800s Danish philosopher. This cat's a gangster, man. He said, it is absolutely unethical when one becomes so busy communicating that he forgets to be what he teaches. And I think this happens often. And it's not always just this like nefarious, I'm putting up a front and I have this hidden life. I think actually what the quote says happens, which is you forget. Like I think for a lot of men, our proficiency actually becomes a barrier to intimacy with God. Like our ability to do well in our work actually limits our ability to become dependent and restful in our relationship with him because I know how to do it. Like, and it doesn't matter what field it is. Like for me, it was ministry. I knew how to talk about the Bible, but that's what's scary. Henri Nouwen, he said, if we don't have a hidden life with God, our public life for God cannot bear fruit. But what he doesn't say is if we don't have a hidden life with God, we can't do ministry. We can't do work. We actually can, and it can have the illusion of impact or success, but it's just not sustainability.
Yeah, dude. Thank you for being honest.
Sure.
In that response.
Man.
I feel
Absolutely.
like we're already swimming in the deep end of the pool.
I know. Right into it.
I don't know any other way to do it.
Right.
I might need some floaties, but I'm here. As you talked about it, I know this has been true for my life as well. And I know you know my story well, and we've walked together, and this is exactly what happened to me, you know, is that I was doing so much for God, getting applauded for it. And it almost became like a self-fulfilling kind of prophecy. It's like the more I do for God, the more I feel like I matter, the more I feel like I belong. So the more I do for God, the more I am. So it was all rooted in doing, and the fruit of it even looked good. Yeah. I had a friend at one point lovingly say, you know that fruit at your grandma's house is like, they look like real apples, and you bite it and it's styrofoam. And I was like, oh yeah. And he's like, well, that's you. And I was like, oh, no, I'm one of the good guys. It's real fruit. Man. It drips down your face, the whole thing. It tastes sweet and it's beautiful. Wow. I wonder for many of us, maybe listening right now, many of our men, as they consider, like, they're probably going like, I'm like in the good camp. I'm the sweet fruit. I'm not styrofoam. Yeah. What are some of the signs that men could even kind of look for on a practical tip of like burnout, exhaustion, working from, I got to earn my identity rather than receive it from the Father and do life with him? What are some of the signs, like the warning signs, if you will? Yeah, I think you referred to me swimming in the deep waters over here. I think I would say it all starts with the invitation toward that, a reality check, assessment of the true condition of your soul. Not what you hope for it to be or not what you think you should be doing, but actually taking assessment of what is true about your current soulish condition. Because I think many of us have fallen prey to just the trappings of knowing what should be happening in most of our lives with the assumption that we're probably doing okay. To your point about the fruit, I think that's not really a show or a mark of your lack of intelligence for you to respond that way. Like, wait, what? I think it's just we're conditioned in so many ways to live life outside of ourselves rather than internally. Like, we're not really people who think about what comes from inside of us coming out of us. We're people who think naturally, how do I maintain and curate and cultivate the perception of who I am? And hopefully some of that
kind of seeps into my heart and then becomes true. Yep. And it really starts with honesty, man. And when I say that, the things that show themselves to be true in honest assessment are things, number one, only you can know. No person can know this. Like only you can know whether or not you actually dig being around people for real. Like you can seem like you do, but one of the signs that I know for myself is that when my soul is tired, I find myself avoiding wanting to be in community. Find myself laughing less, or impulses to want to even experience or express any sort of happiness or joy. I find myself just feeling really depleted very quickly, even if I can put up the pretenses that these are just like, I don't want to be prescriptive, but I think to answer your question, there are these real indicators that only you know are either true or not, regardless of what you think you should be doing. You know where you really are. And I think it's in those moments of expression of the reality. Like, again, I get excited about all this stuff, so stop me. But like in Psalms, over and over and over again, especially the writings of David, David is speaking on behalf of his soul. He's speaking to his soul. He's like challenging his soul. He's like always aware of what's happening with his soul. And sometimes when he's checking in, he's really embarrassed. He's like admitting these deficiencies that are needing to be expressed before God. Sometimes he's recognizing he doesn't want his soul to stay there. So he tells his soul to believe something, And so, in the times where he can't, Psalm 139, Lord, you look at me. You tell me the things that I can't see in my mind and in my heart. So always fighting to expose the reality of the soul. I think I heard a quote one time. I think it was John Ortberg. Someone said, the soul is a stream and you are its keeper. You're not the source of the water flowing.
That's right.
But you are the one that looks for the trash floating on the top and like pluck it out. And so, that's what I would say. Those indicators are there if we're looking for them.
Yes. That's so well said, man.
So for the man who like looks faithful on the outside, maybe even dependable, like he's the guy, everybody's like, I know I can go to that guy. He'll get the job done. He'll get the ministry done. What lies is he most tempted to believe about his productivity?
I mean, I think for me, because I've been that guy, so this is not an assumption. The lies I did believe is that my identity, worth, and value are found in what I do for God. And I think it's easy for us to see how that can be true because there is a genuine desire with good intentions to spend our lives for the kingdom, like to serve God with what we do in our work, regardless of the vocation. We want to be people who are known as purposeful and diligent and contributors, and all of that is good because it comes from God. He designed work. We should be people who want to and do well in our work, but our value being assigned directly one for one as a correlation to what our output is one of the biggest lies that I think, especially for men, that we believe, that it's only as a result of my ability to X that I can show myself to be a contributor in the kingdom, or even the type of person that's respectable. And I think that would be the greatest one that I would warn any friends or men or anyone listening to avoid, because when that lie takes root, it is nearly impossible for us to find any way that we will feel like there is significance or contentment, because you're fighting a losing battle. Like you literally are fighting to find identity, worth, and value in a source that is not able to provide it. And so we'll try to work harder and give more time and more energy. And it's literally, even with good intentions for God, killing us. And that's, we can't go down that path.
It's funny. Last night, my wife and I, somebody had recommended this documentary on Netflix, And I'm not endorsing the documentary, but it was called In Waves and War. And it's about them testing this drug treatment on PTSD, like Navy SEALs who are like suicidal, who are having just massive issues in their lives. And some of them have been out for 10 plus years, but they can't deal with it. And in it, it's like questionable. Is this stuff good? It basically is like a hallucinogenic type of thing. But all of them who go through it have this confrontation, and they realize, like one guy put it, he goes, the thing that I thought was the problem, those were just the curtains. And then they got pulled back, and there's this like box of junk in the back that I've been hiding. It's been chained up, it's rusty, it's leaking. And he's like, that was the thing that was confronted. And almost all of them, it's this like usually childhood, something like their identity of who their father was to them, the way he spoke to them, all of those things. And just hearing this now as you're sharing it, I'm like, man, that just feels so true. Like we're all just, ultimately, we're just trying to make our own way, our own identity, do what's right in our eyes, and confronting lies. But it's like what you said, the stream, we're looking for water. We can't fill it, though. We're like, there's just junk all over the place. I need to deal with this stuff. Yeah,
man. I think when you start talking about the junk in the back, I think there's definitely family of origin stuff, things like that. There's beautiful significance in any of that heart work that's available. Pedro, I know you deal a lot in that yourself and helping guys and your own work. But when I think of that bucket of junk in the back, I think one of the other things that goes unaddressed often, sadly, is the evaluation of sin issues that are present in your life. I mean, it's really weird and sad that a lot of times in faith conversations, we don't talk about sin. We're very hesitant to bring it forward because we don't want to be offensive. We don't want to be assumptive. We don't want to be people who are condemning. But I will tell you personally, even in my own journey, there are some things that have come through some of the evaluatory work around family of origin, heart issues, things that are contributing to who I have become as an adult because of trauma and all of that is true and real. But I've had to look full in the face on areas of sin that I've harbored and justified. And it's taken three things for me that I think are also when people are going, man, I'm desperate for a change. One of the things I always say is you want to start with confession, repentance, and renouncing. So confession is sort of this identification of what is true in your story. And yes, this is true for Christians. I know we have the grace of God, which covers our sin, and his righteousness is put on us like a robe. So God looks at us. He no longer sees us in our sin. He sees Jesus. But I think the other side of that is in our humanness, we need to read through all, especially the 13 letters that Paul is attributed for. And he continually is telling Christians, flee youthful lusts, pursue righteousness, put down idolatry, flee idolatry. Like these are things that even as Christians are keeping us from experiencing freedom on earth. Even if we're going into eternity with freedom for salvation, we can find freedom here. So confession of sin, repentance, of course, is not just stopping and turning, but the Hebrew word of shuv is like to accept being found. So it's turning from where your sin has been present in your life and allowing yourself to be picked up and brought back home. You think about like the story of the prodigal son, you know, how the father runs to him, embraces him and kisses him. And in essence, he's bringing him back home. And it's the son's job to allow him to bring him back. And then the last piece is the renouncing. And that can sound kind of like heavy, like, wait, okay, I usually only hear a renouncing when it gets into these weird, super spiritual, spiritual darkness, spiritual warfare. But I think about Paul, man, in like 2 Corinthians, I think it's chapter 4, where Paul says, having this ministry, we do not lose heart, but we renounce secret and shameful ways. And the reason he says this is basically saying, I've identified these sin issues, so I know them before you could ever call me out on it. Mm-hmm. I've also repented from them. I've turned and gone in a different direction. Jesus has restored my life. He's made me new. And I'm renouncing them. Basically, I'm coming out of agreement with this. Like, I'm no longer partners with this junk. Yeah. And I'm saying it, I'm renouncing it, because before you could ever even put any accusation on me, I'm telling you, I'm aware of my own proclivities. I'm aware of my former story, but it no longer defines me. And so I think for some people who are going, man, I tried the Sabbath thing. I tried all your, you know, whatever. I've had people say, man, I read your book, man, I tried some stuff that you said. It's cool. But I think the real deep work starts with sin issues at times that aren't really fun to look at.
Yeah. I appreciate that you pointed that out too, because I think it is, well, what you said, your past, your trauma, all those things can be there, but ultimately it's our own fallen nature, our own sin that reacts sinfully to being sinned against, right? So we don't get a pass to be like, well, I'm this way simply because I was abused. Like that has a part. It's a both and. Yeah. So you have freedom, and then that our identity is actually rooted in Christ. But it does, like, Paul wouldn't have told all those things if it wasn't necessary to tell Christians, don't keep sinning. Don't do that one. Renounce that one.
Well, one of the craziest ones, and I don't know if it's taking us off topic, but man, I've been really thinking a lot lately about this story in John 5 where he heals a dude. He was lame for 38 years, tells him to get up. You know, there's so many, you know, as a preacher, you know, there's so many layers to that story that I want to explore. But the one that's been hitting me lately is really a trip, because we think about Jesus, his graciousness, his kindness, his rescue of our lives, and who he is in the way of redemption and wholeness and renewal. But this one sentence has been sticking with me. He heals this guy, and he leaves. The religious leaders come. They get mad at him for carrying his mat. The dude leaves those guys, bumps into Jesus. Jesus says, hey, you still good? He's like, yeah. And he goes, how did he say it? So go and sin no more, so nothing worse happens to you. I'm like, I don't know what to do with that there, because it's like, when we talk about Jesus, we're always talking about redemption and renewal and forgiveness and grace, and it's covered, which is all true. This is the gospel. But what's been hitting me, and I think is really important, if I'm honest, especially for men and men in the church, it matters how we live on earth. Like, it actually does. And I'm not talking about some weird broken way that we have to earn our salvation over and over again, but why would Jesus say, hey, I don't want you to keep sinning? He actually cared about it. It wasn't just like, oh, you're cool. So anyway, I say that coming back to our conversation, just to basically say, I think sometimes it's not even about like our lack of rhythms or a lack of intentionality. Sometimes it's just a matter of our soul is unsettled, because there's stuff floating on the top of the river that we need to pluck out, and we need to lay before the feet of the cross. So
that's so good, man.
Hey, you guys might have noticed the hats we've been wearing in some of the episodes here. These are from our friends over at Tennessee Hats. Everywhere we go, people are stopping us, asking us about these hats. And we were like, hey, we would love to be able to talk about them on the show and even make them available for you guys. So if you would like to grab one of these hats, you can go to the link in the show notes and get yours today.
So well said. I've been thinking a lot of, as you're talking about, it's kind of a weird, it'll feel like left field, but I think it blends. I've been thinking a lot about suffering. And for me, I was going through a pretty intense season of busyness, right? Which is a type of suffering, whether induced by me or not.
That's right.
But I was a full season. In the middle of this season, I was on a tour bus with some artists, and we talked on a phone call. And you were kind of just downloading, dude, I'm writing this book and I just finished, and blah, blah. I was like, yo, I need this book. And at the time, like, you had no copies yet.
That was it.
I don't know if you remember this, but you had a PDF.
Okay.
And you emailed me the PDF.
Oh, wow.
I printed it at this little church we were doing the event with. I think we were out with Jordan Feliz and Colton Dixon. And we were on the West Coast in Cali. And I printed it off, and I took this huge stack of papers.
That's crazy.
They didn't even have a stapler, so I'm like holding them when the wind's blowing. I'm trying not to lose my soul, literally.
Yeah,
literally. Soul rest. That was a pun.
That was good.
And so I walk on the. I'll never forget it, dude. And God is my witness. I walk all the way to this other side of this, like kind of soccer field. They probably played a lot of sports on for the church. And there's one tree. You can't make it up. One tree, and I got under the shade of the tree. And I was like, okay, God, I know this is going to change me in some way. I know what I'm walking into because I know you. I was like, this is going to light me up. I know it is. And I'm always a little scared. I think men listening probably a little scared of like, what am I going to find when I slow down?
That's right.
So I'm in this season of busy. I'm in this season and there's a lot of inner stuff. It's like somebody took water in a clear glass and they put dirt in it and they shook it up and it's just foggy. I can't see straight. That's how I felt internally. I started reading your book, and I probably, no exaggeration, got 4 or 5 pages in just to the introduction of the idea of like you laying it out, and was in tears because it was like a breath of fresh air. Wow. It was like, whoa. What I've since learned, that was a long time ago. What year was that? Probably.
Man, I don't even remember.
Before the book released.
Yeah.
I mean, it was
2018.
Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah.
And so I get that. And many, many, many years would go by before I really realized what happened under that tree, which it really wasn't about rest. Rest was really the soil for my healing.
That's right.
It wasn't about rest. And I think sometimes in the Christian space, we can almost self-impose this idea that I've got to go do rest. It's another thing I need to be good at.
That's good.
I got to go do Sabbath because God said do Sabbath.
Yeah.
And we can almost like beat ourselves up even more when really rest is this table we sit at.
That's right.
That does something deep within us. And it would be a long time later before I'd realize what happened under that tree, which was realizing God was inviting me into restoration, into healing, to places in my heart that I had closed doors. I mean, turned off lights, didn't know the doors were there, didn't even know there was hallways.
Right.
And I'm thankful for your book. I'm thankful for your writing. I'm also really just curious as I think about that version of Pedro back there, who still can creep into today's Pedro, and the men who are feeling a type of suffering in life right now for themselves. What did you learn in your own story, in your own life through loss, laying down the gifts, getting alone with God, getting naked before God? What did you learn about like suffering that maybe all those other things, the talents, the gifts, the stages, the speaking could have never taught you?
Man, I mean, everything. One of the hardest things I've ever had to write down, period, bar none, was one line in the book. And it's so funny because my wife knows, like, I just have, it's really weird. Like, I can remember Bible verses, I can remember a lot of things, but then there are these like large swaths of things that I just don't remember. And really one of the only things I remember specifically about having written the book was how hard it was to write one sentence that was it four words? Suffering is a gift. It was one of the hardest things, and it even makes me emotional now because I'm thinking, I don't want to suffer. I don't want to experience the pain of what I experienced when we experienced loss through miscarriage, and just realizing that my value has been tied up in what I've done, and just like the reality of my exposure of my, just true self, and like just the disappointment and the sadness and like all the like. I don't want that. I don't want to experience suffering. I don't want to feel the pain of having things being torn away and to get to the heart of, I don't want any of that. Like none of that, even right now, as I'm saying, I don't want that, but it's a gift. Suffering is a gift. And I think that the biggest thing that I learned alongside that, if that's one, then 1A is that suffering truly is the greatest teacher that we could experience in the human experience, because it's in suffering that we actually are made to experience the one thing that the whole stinking Bible is about. If somebody said right now, tell me what the Bible is about, you got 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1, I would say depending fully on the living God. Like, I believe that's the whole book. We got this story of creation. God makes everything in rhythm with himself. Genesis chapter 3 happens, and then that's where the party ends. The rhythm is off. No longer is humanity soulishly dependent on God alone. And the rest of this book is us trying to figure out how to do it. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. And so I think suffering for me, there's a quote from Charles Dickens, and just to even paraphrase, he basically says that suffering was one of the greatest teachers. And then he says, because of suffering, I've been bent and broken, but hopefully into a better shape. And I feel like that's the thing that suffering has given me.
Yeah.
It was a present.
Yeah.
It was a gift. I don't want it.
Yep.
I didn't want it.
Yep.
It's like, you wrap up a nice box and whatever, and it's like, there's something really good in here. I'm like, I don't want it, bro. Like, no, you got to you can keep it. But inside that box, man, is what I would say the greatest teacher of dependence fully on God. And that's all he's ever wanted from all of us.
Come on.
Yeah. My wife and I have been going through this, mulling over this quote from A.W. Tozer. And it's from one of his books, but it's sort of shocking, and it's along the same lines as suffering. But he says, like, it would seem to me before God can use a man greatly, he must wound him deeply.
Yeah. Is that knowledge of the whole?
Yes. Yeah. And that has just sat with me because we've been in a season where there's just been hardship and wounds and everything. But to hold on to the hope of that, like, when Paul is converted in Acts, he's sent to Ananias, and the Lord tells Ananias, like, hey, I'm sending this guy Paul to you. And he's like, whoa, what? And he goes, yeah, I'm going to show him how much he must suffer for my name's sake. And then toward the end of Paul's life, he's like, that I may know him in the fellowship of his suffering. Yeah. It's like, okay, I must have something a little off if I think I'm trying to get through this life with as little suffering as possible. Yeah. Instead, I need to go. It's not that I'm like sadistic or masochistic or something, trying to cause chaos, but I'm really just trying to go, Lord, whatever you have, whatever is necessary to truly know you, I want that. And I want that. Like,
it's interesting.
Want that.
This
I
is
love that.
Coming back to what you were talking about with rest, that we have this belief that it's the rest itself that will be restorative. Yeah. But it's actually in the rest that God can do the work that he needs to do. Yes. One of the things that makes me think of that when you were just talking, I took a trip to Israel a few years ago, and we were in this place called the Wilderness of Zin. You see it in Numbers chapter 20. It was really interesting because we're here in this place where during the time when we were there, bro, it's everything you would think the wilderness in the Bible would be, like brown rocks as far as you could see. It's like 108 degrees, and there was like 2 or 3 trees and like miles of like, it's just hot, And I remember we were walking through the wilderness of Zin, and the dude who was like one of the guides was saying, it's interesting because in the West, where we are here in America, he said the people over in the West, they think of the wilderness, and the first thought in your mind is, I got to get out of here as quick as possible. Like, I don't want to be in the wilderness. This is, I'm disoriented. Like, this is suffering. I don't want it. But here, people see the wilderness with an air of affection. Wow. And he was like, you're probably thinking, why would anybody want to go into the wilderness? And he said, here, a lot of people will answer a question with a question. So if you said, well, why do you want to be in the wilderness? He said, people here would say, well, have you read the Bible? And the reason is because over and over again, story after story from the very beginning, it was in the wilderness that people experienced the clarity and the ability to hear from the living God. So whether it was an encounter with a burning bush, or whether it was like Elijah, whatever, like Paul gets the gospel, it's in the wilderness, Jesus in the wilderness. And so the phrase in Hebrew is, I'm terrible in the pronunciation, but it's davar in the midbar. It's a word in the wilderness. And so even that as an idea represents what I believe the idea of Sabbath really represents. So you think about Sabbath, well, what is the true value to the human? It says in Exodus 20, verse 8, honor the Sabbath, keep it holy. 6 days you labor, on the 7th day you'll do nothing, no one in your house, whatever. Well, it's not the inactivity itself that's restorative. It's not, we sometimes falsely believe I just can't move. Right. And it's in the physical rest that God is gifting me what I need. Now, there's a byproduct of physical rest, which is great. But what I like to say is for 6 days, we get to do a work with our hands. On the 7th day, we remember a work that can only be done by the hand of God alone. That's the value of Sabbath. It's not that we don't move. It's not that we're not working. It's in our not working that we have the opportunity to receive what only comes from Him. If I say, when does Sabbath start for most of us in our culture, we'll think, well, Sunday morning, right? Like go to church, Sunday morning, go to sleep, and then Monday morning, back at it. But in the Middle East, Sabbath starts Friday evening. Now you might wonder, like, is that just like logistics? They do stuff different over there. Well, the reason that Sabbath starts in the evening is it's representing that God is still working while you are resting. It's a whole different paradigm.
Yeah.
Because now what we're saying is the rest that we're receiving is coming because he is working. So even on the seventh day of creation, if we look at that story, God rested from the work that he had done. But it was actually in his rest that something else was created, the celebration of what he's done. So I say that to say, coming back to the suffering thing, this is why suffering is an important attribute to our development. It's in this being, Psalm 23, made to lie down in green pastures. Like we are made to lie down so that we can receive the care that comes from the living God.
So
I get
good.
excited about this stuff, so sorry if I'm taking us on.
No. This is so good. I'm curious for maybe some men who are listening right now who I know for me, when I sat under that tree with your book a long time ago, and I hope every man goes and buys your book. I know you're not here to promote your book at all. We'll promote it because I'm a firm believer and I've read it so many times. It's tattered and it sits in my office. But I know for me, there was an element of, and maybe some I needed to feel, but of guilt and shame that kind of rose to the surface. And even as I say it, my throat gets choked up because I remember feeling this like, dang, dude, I'm trying to do good things for you, God. I'm trying to make the world a better place. I'm trying. And then now I'm told, even in my trying, I'm failing at my trying.
Right.
And it's like, I wonder if you could just speak for a moment to the dude who's like, just sounds like another freaking thing that's going to be really hard. And how do I even unplug? And do I start on Friday? Do my kids got traveling team baseball? You know, it's like you're thinking about real life and you're like, how do I find not just stopping, not just ceasing, but how do I find deep soul rest? How do I even toe into that water?
Yes.
Where do I begin? Because I feel so much shame. I bet there's dudes who are listening even up till now and who are like, I'm going to go find like a Joe Rogan podcast where it's about doing some more stuff and taking creatine or something. You know what I mean? Like that'll fix it. It'll fix it. I'll just get a pump from that. And it's like a quick hit. And what we're talking about is like a whole renewal and shift in our inner world and not living externally, living internally. And that can start to just feel like life's getting flipped inside out when I thought it was supposed to be like this. Yeah. And now I feel like I've been maybe getting it wrong like this whole time. And like, what would you say the Lord would say to them in that space?
Yeah. I'll start with the first point of identification being the shame or guilt. It's interesting because there's a passage in Romans that gets quoted often, and it's usually attributed to the follower of Jesus not feeling guilt or shame connected to the story they've lived out prior to conversion. And I want to give the preface before I even say the verse, because when I say the verse, sometimes we can fight to go to that place. But I actually think the verse is more along the lines of what you're saying. It's written to Christian people who in their Christian journey realize about their Christian life that they are misaligned or misinformed or living out of a different place of reality, where he says there is therefore no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. It's not just, hey, I know you lived a crazy life. You got things you're embarrassed about before conversion. Don't be condemned about that. Yes. But I'm saying, I think Paul, like himself, feeling what you were referring to, the residual of the things that he had done to people, not only in his prior life before conversion, but even in his journey of developing what it now means to be a missionary of the gospel of Jesus Christ. You see over his life, starting out when he was this beginning stages kind of evangelist to when he was about to die, how he went from like Paul, an apostle of Jesus Christ, to Paul, the worst of sinners. Like he realized about himself, his brokenness was revealed over time, because what he saw was that there was this opportunity for me to receive the grace given by God, even in the recognition that with good intention to do good work for God, maybe I've been a little bit off. And so I want to speak to that, saying there is no condemnation in Christ Jesus. The other thing I would say is, for the person who wants to take steps forward, it's interesting because there are times where people, because in the subtitle of the book, it says, reclaim your life, return to Sabbath. The book is not about Sabbath. It really is about what I would say is Sabbath thinking. And people will say sometimes, well, what about Jesus fulfilled the law? Like, we don't have to do that anymore. We don't have to. Like, there's a lot of and to that, I'm not a debater. That's not who I am. But I think when we say it that way, we're missing a huge point. Right. Because I would even contend that the 10 Commandments themselves were not rules to be followed so God would be pleased with us. Yeah. They were 10 pathways to communion with God so we can feel fulfilled in connection with Him. Wow. So if that's true, number 4 is honor the Sabbath. It was not about you doing that correctly so God would be pleased with your effort. Yeah. No, it was a pathway to communion with Him, that if you stop, you can receive what only comes from Him when you open your hands to receive and stop doing the work that's keeping your hands busy. Yeah. And so if that's the case, I would tell, the men who might feel overwhelmed, dude, I don't want to fail at another thing. I don't know how to stop for 24 hours. Cheers. I agree. It's same. It's but what I do know is I know how for 10 minutes when I walk from my car to the parking lot for the whatever, to actually be intentional, to turn off my phone, literally power it down, put it in my pocket and just say, God, I'm ready to receive whatever it is that you have for me in this moment. Now, at risk of, I try not to be prescriptive, but there are 3 words, if you don't mind, that I would say are really helpful. The first one is intentionality. So to be intentional. If we want to receive rest, it seems like Captain Obvious, but we actually have to show up for the thing that we want. So although we might not know how to do it right, we do need to make space for it. So if it's that 10-minute walk, if it's, hey, I'm going to go sit on the porch today, I'm going to do whatever. Yeah. Now, somebody might go, 10-minute walk, how's that going to help the deep anxiety that I'm feeling? And I would say, well, did you have 10 minutes this past week where you did that? Well, no. Well, that 10 minutes is better than the 10 minutes you didn't have. You might not think it's enough, but it's at least something. Right. And I am a firm believer that if we start to taste the fruit of that time, we'll crave it more. The second word is substantial. So if I'm going to be intentional, I might say, all right, I'm going to, show up to God with open hands to receive the rest that He can give me. But sometimes we do that, and I don't actually think we believe we can receive the thing we're hoping for. And that sounds kind of funny, but it really matters. Do I actually think that when I read the Bible, I'll meet with God there? Or do I just read the Bible and hope that reading the Bible is something that will help somehow? When I pray and ask God for His insight and wisdom, do I actually believe He can do it? He can give me that? And so I feel like substantial is a word that comes to mind because I go, I'm going to be intentional and I'm going to actually believe that I can receive the thing that God wants to give me. Wow. And then the last one is sustainable. I think we need to look at it and say, what can I see myself for the foreseeable future committing to in order to be intentional to show up to God in the substantial way? And for some of us, that might be in a season like ours. Well, I got 3 kids, 12, 8, and 2.5 right now. And for me, we don't have the luxury of a walk in the park, all Saturday and then sit on a picnic basket or blanket with a basket. And it's no, but I have to have some Sabbath thinking to go, how do I invite God's presence into this to receive what only comes from Him, even in the midst of running around on a Saturday? There is ways for us to receive. And the reason I believe that is, again, it was never about it being a law to be fulfilled. So, yeah, it was a law. It's 10 commandments. Yeah. But that law was meant from God as a gift to meet with Him.
That's so good.
That's a good reframe, man.
How can a man tell the difference between when he is faithfully hard at work versus idolatrously striving?
Yeah, I mean, I think It's funny, I have just grown to be honest with myself and I try to live that out, hopefully even in how I'm answering these questions, that they're coming from an honest place. And because of that, like when I hear that, like I don't think about it in terms of other people. Like if I just, let me ask myself that, like, and I feel like my honest answer is like, oh, it's not hard. Like, I know. Right. Like, it's not even like I need indicators or some sort of like rubric or like a framework to go, okay, with this scale, like if this one here and, what's it called? Quadrant thinking with all, like I have all that stuff. I love it. But it's like, nah, man, I think I know them when I am giving out that the hopefulness that I have for kudos and, consideration and attention and, applause. And I know when the work that I'm doing feels sustainable and energizing and exciting and fruitful. And I know the difference when it feels depleting and terrible and arduous and hard. And I know, what I'm saying? Like I know, and I think where I go back to is what we said a little bit earlier. I think if we're giving ourselves the permission to regularly bring ourselves before God to take assessment of the condition of our soul, we'll learn to see when we're starting to drift. It's funny. I think about, I grew up in New Jersey. I didn't really grow up going outdoors much. Like I didn't camping every now and then, like weird, random things, like, but I mostly concrete stuff like that, and, I think about times even in my adulthood later on where I've had a chance to like be on a boat or like on a canoe or something. And it's so interesting because like if you're sitting on a boat and let's just say you're with a buddy and you're talking and you're in a canoe or you're on this little, boat that's floating in the lake. Yeah. You're just enjoying being together and you're talking and, you're not paying attention. And all of a sudden you look up and you're like, how do we get over here? Like, this is crazy. Like there was no perceptible wind. There was no waves. There was no other boats driving. It was peaceful, quiet, but still there was a drift. And the only reason I knew there was a drift is because when I looked up and I saw where we started and where we are now are different. That's only the time where I go, oh, I've drifted. Yeah. And so to answer your question, I guess in a roundabout way, we have to take assessment to understand, like, where am I really? And I think we'll then know where we are.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so good, man. CZ, thank you so much for being here. I feel like we could probably go for like 3 hours. Just so like fun. I love digging into this. I know, Pedro, you love digging into this. I think this is something that's so deeply needed for men, not just men, all people, but really, like, I think it is something we don't even realize we struggle with as much as we do, because it's the drift that we live in. We're like, that's just the way life goes. Right. But to find rest, to find Sabbath, to find our true identity is in Christ and in Him alone, and then live from that and not just trying to achieve that or something. That it will revolutionize our lives, but it will also seem like it's so difficult. I don't know why abiding in Christ, abiding in our identity in Him feels like such a chore sometimes, but it does. Yeah.
I would just say, to finish, that's one of the most important points of awareness. I know you're saying right here at the end, but if I could
go for
say
it.
You want to take anything away from this, especially for men, you're enough as a son. You're receiving sonship and the father heart of God is the greatest gift you can give yourself in the way of bringing your life to the world in a meaningful way, to live from the reality of your sonship. Because the reason abiding is difficult is because we feel like we need to earn that place in the house. And many of us have father wounds. Many of us have poor representations of what a true father's heart should look like for our lives. Even the fathers who have done the best they could with what they have. And I say that poor representation, not in a shot or in a criticism, but just because we're broken humans. And I think our experience relative to our fathering on earth has affected our ability to actually believe the truth of the Bible that says, sitting and staying is enough in the presence of God, not your identity being connected to what you can produce. That's why it's hard. We get itchy going, man, it's enough for me to just want to be here right by my dad.
Yeah.
Because many of us have not experienced that on earth. And so to think about that with the living God, I mean, it's hard to get our minds around.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. As we close, we're closing.
Yeah, we're closing.
This is it. We're closing. This is the hard close.
Yeah,
you got
yeah.
kids to pick
Well,
up.
it's on you guys, man. I'm just like, you driving.
I don't think I've ever shared this outside of here, but I had, my story. You know my story too, but my dad and I we didn't have a lot of moments together growing up. And we had a time where I was turning 30 and he said, hey, let's go to meet I was in Cali and he's in Bama, and let's meet in Texas at the AT&T Stadium and watch Alabama was going to be playing somebody. And I was like, dude, that would be amazing. And I was kind of nervous. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't know what that was like. I've been around my dad a lot, but we've not had just me and him. Like, I can't even think of many just me and hims. And I'll make it quick, but we were sitting there, and prior to going in the flight in, all the things, I'm like, I'm going to ask him this. I'm going to ask him about his childhood. I'm going to ask him about this. I want to learn him. I want to know him. I want to, whatever. And I got there and I sat down and all the questions I had just like went away. And I remember, and it's just kind of weird, so just bear with me for a second, but I remember our legs touching, like our calves. We both had shorts on and our legs were touching. And I looked down and I was like, my legs look like his legs. Man, I really like being here with my dad.
Yeah.
This is nice. And there was a freedom in just being with him. And I think sometimes we make all these things. We got to say this and we got to do that and we got to perform and we got to, just a lot of shoulding. My counselor says you should all over yourself, bro. Golly, I should so much. And why? Like, embrace time with your father. And I left there and I inevitably was preaching. God set it up that way in San Antonio. And I just went and just was like, when was the last time you just got lost? You forgot all your questions even, and you were just with God. And maybe that's the beginning of healing. Maybe that's the beginning of wholeness. And so all of our efforts, even here today, I can speak up for all of us, are in an effort to point us back to just being a son and being with your dad and realizing how much like him you actually were made in his image. And there's a freedom. There's the wounds can come forward. The hurts will come forward. But really, you're held by a father who just wants to be at a game with you, the game of life, and sit in the mess. And so I hope that that's what was felt today. Your heart is awesome, dude. And I'm reminded again of how much I'm thankful to be your friend, to be known by you. You've shown me all of this. You've demonstrated it. So thank you.
CZ, would you do us a favor? I want to just speak. There's really two kinds of guys who are watching, listening right now. One has never surrendered to Christ. One maybe says, I'm a Christian, but I don't really see any fruit in my life. They're kind of just floating, drifting. Yeah. Would you tell them how they can either restore that relationship, that fire, if they would say they're a Christian, but especially if they don't know Christ? Like, what do they need? How do they come into relationship?
Man, I think the most magnificent news in the whole world is that there is no different gospel message for those two people.
Yeah.
There's one gospel, and that same gospel is the respite that both of those folks need. And that gospel, the good news that we share as a result of the work of Christ, is that it's simply a matter of surrender. I said a little bit earlier, there's this word, shuv. Teshuva is this repentance in the Old Testament. And the idea that this comes from is sort of framed out not only in the story of the prodigal son, but I think about the two stories that come right before it. That's the one that usually gets to shine in Luke chapter 15. But right before it, Jesus tells two other stories. He tells the story of the lost sheep, and he tells the story of the lost coin. And to me, I think the two people you just described are sort of represented here. The lost sheep sort of has some agency. It's doing its thing. It kind of has wandered off. Maybe it's that second person. You go, man, I follow Jesus, but maybe I've drifted. I don't feel connected. I think about that lost sheep. And it says in the story that Jesus tells that the shepherd leaves the sheep to go find this one.
Yeah.
And then it says that he picks him up and he brings him back.
Yeah.
He picks up the sheep and brings him back. The sheep that has wandered off, the shepherd brings him back. So you might be wondering, how does that apply to our humanness? Well, the person, if you're hearing this and you're going, man, I drifted. Like I drifted. Like I've gotten out of the flock and I'm feeling dry. That sheep, the work he has to do is simply to stop and to allow himself to be restored.
Yeah.
Now, his agency requires for him to stop, to turn to the shepherd.
Yeah.
But the shepherd is the rescuer. Allow yourself to be brought back home. But then I think about the second story, and this one's a trip, man. Because some of us are like, man, what about somebody who's far from God and they don't know what it looks like to be able to even figure out the right words to say or it's really beautiful because it says the second story is this woman who loses a coin. A coin is an inanimate object.
Yeah.
It's like, why would he tell a story about a coin? Like she goes, the sheep is one thing. It wanders off, you pick it up, you bring it back. The son, that's one thing. Reckless, goes out there, comes back. A coin? So she goes and she scours the house, and in the story, she finds the coin, and in finding the coin, she picks it up, brings it home, and throws a party. Man, if you're listening to this and you're going, look, I surrender, God. I don't know how to do this on my own. I don't have the right words to say. I've never prayed a prayer in my life. I don't know any fancy Bible stuff. I just know I want to be rescued by the Jesus that you guys are talking about. If he is a redeemer, if he is a restorer, I surrender. I am like an inanimate coin. I don't have anything to offer. I don't have any history in any of this. I need you in my realization right now that I need to be picked up. I need you to rescue me. You are the redeemer. You are the restorer. So I think in my best way, that would be how I would encourage people.
Yeah.
There, of course, are prayers we can pray and formulaic things that we can offer. But I think the most important thing to the living God is that our hearts are postured for the thing that we're hoping for.
Yeah.
Do we truly believe he's our rescuer and redeemer? And if so, we say yes to him having agency in our lives to sit on the throne of our hearts. So, that's
Amen.
all I got.
Yeah. Amen.
That's everything right there. Well, guys, thank you for watching this episode. Thank you, CZ, again, for being here. If you were moved by this, if it was something that really impacted your life, would you do a few things for us? First of all, we want to hear from you. You can comment below on YouTube. You can also hit us up at dudes@standupdude.com. And then you can send this to somebody who needs it, and honestly, it's the gospel. So I don't know anybody who doesn't need to hear the gospel again. As you said earlier, CZ, even that Christian guy needs the gospel. It's the same gospel. So guys, go ahead and do those things. And then if this episode impacted you as well, you will probably like this next one that is up here being suggested to you right now. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, guys. We love you.